Organizational Behavior, Chapter 14, Managing Change. LO, the nature of change, costs and benefits of change, resistance to change, basic frameworks for interpreting change, role of transformational leadership in change, practices to build support for change, meaning, characteristics of organizational design. Nature of change at work. So when we look at the nature and change at work, change, an altercation occurring at work or in the work environment that affects the ways which employees must act. Widespread organization, human and technical problem, disrupts equilibrium, establishes when people develop a stable set of relationships with the environment. Listen, if you're in a room with 50 people and you ask them by show of hands, how many people here who like change? Nobody's raising their hand. So it's always going to be associated usually with something negative before positive in people's mind. When you say we're change, we're going to be going through some change. Role of a manager with regard to change. So a lot of times I tell people the manager and leaders are the people who actually can dictate how well the change goes or not. And they got a couple of different ways they deal with this. First is proactive, anticipating events, initiating change, and taking control of the organization's destiny. Okay, I call it priming the pump. Get things ready, get people ready. Be proactive. Before the change happens, start preparing for it. Don't wait. Reactive, responding to events, adapting to change, and tempering the consequences of change. And you have to be reactive sometimes because some change is not anticipated. Some things happen beyond your control. And I'll give you an example. When COVID-19 hit, that changed everybody's way of doing business. You couldn't plan for that. Responses to change. How people feel about change determines how they will respond to it, caused by personal history, work environment. Hawthorne effect, group's perception of being observed and one's interpretation of its significance tends to change the group. So responses to change, one of the things that helps people's responses to change be better is when the leaders prepare them for that versus drop off. But you also have to look at their history and environment, and a lot of external factors come into play to how people respond, and everybody can respond differently. Hawthorne effect, basically when people believe that they're being watched and stuff, they behave differently than they would if they think they're not being watched. Responses to change, group response. People show their attachment to the group by responding uniformly to change. Homeostasis. People act to establish a steady state of need fulfillment and to protect themselves from disturbances of that balance. Groups return to their perceived best way of life when any change occurs. So when you see this, people can respond to stuff in a group response. How does a group respond to this? And I put a lot of value on this because, you know, if you got 10 people and 10 people telling you kind of the same thing about something, there's some validity to that. Somebody want to listen to those responses. And we look at homeostasis, you know, people act to establish a steady state of fulfillment and to protect themselves from disturbances and balance. So this is what, again, people get used to doing something. They do what they can to protect themselves during the course of that change. Unified social response. So when you look at this unified social response, we see a couple of different things. We see stimulus and we see individuals and then we see actual response. So based on the stimulus, what goes in and how it goes in determines how people feel and about these different things. And how they feel about these things determine how the actual response will be on the opposite end. Cost and benefits. Intentional cost occurs when individuals weigh the positive and negative aspects of the change. Psychic costs, psychological costs that the affect a person's inner self. Repetitive change syndrome, sustained series of small or moderate changes over a period of time. So when you look at this, there's always going to be a cost associated with that. And it's not always in money. And sometimes it's in human capital or productivity, whatever it may be. But there's going to be some intentional change that that comes. Some positive, some negative. And psychological is how does it affect people and stuff. That's it. And and then you have the repetitive change syndrome where you have stuff that happens over a period of time. A little bit of change, it keeps happening, keeps happening, keeps happening. Either way, you got to look at it. So if you have a little bitty change that keeps happening over a period of time, ultimately that can end up being very big change collectively. Cost and benefits produces cumulative effects that overload a person's system. Management should consider each change, help individuals understand it, and experience a net gain from it. So this is what management has to step in. And, whereas you don't want the people to get overrun and feeling like they're overburdened some stuff. Management has to be involved with that, listening to people and communicating with them and help them to understand what it is they're doing, why they're doing it, so that you can ultimately get a net gain. Resistance to change. And this is something that's very big, resistance to change, because again, people don't like change. So you see resistance in various forms and fashions. Any employee behavior is designed to discredit, delay, or prevent work change. Causes of resistance: organizational cultures that overvalue criticism, new ideas, undercutting changes, behind the scenes, indecisive managers, suffering analysis paralysis, emphasis on flashy proposals, no follow-up, and bunker mentality. So when you see these things, these are things right here that people will fall into. Not only just individuals, but possibly groups and even organizations can fall into. And here's the one that jumps out at me that stands out. The indecisive manager. Some managers believe that, you know what, if I just don't pay attention to this, I stick my head in the sand, it'll go away. And that's what we refer to as analysis by paralysis. I'm an analysis, I'm an analyze this thing, but in the course of doing it, you're not doing anything, so you're basically paralyzed. Nature and scope, perceived threats. So real, imagined, intended or unintended, direct, indirect, large and small. You have to understand perception, what people believe. When is something not real? When people believe it's real. These things will happen as a result of change. There's always going to be things that's going to be intended and unintended, but you have to deal with that. Sometimes direct or indirectly, and even if they're small things, don't dismiss those because they're small. Address those so that they don't become an issue, a bigger issue later. Success of change depends on how skillfully it is managed. Again, how skillfully it is managed. That's management. That's leaders. Chain reaction effect occurs when a change that directly affects one or more persons leads to a direct or indirect reaction from people sharing mutual interest. So if I'm doing a job and I see Mike and Linda doing similar jobs and I see how the change is affecting them, I'm also looking at, okay, well, how's it going to affect me the same way, And it may not, but that might be my perception. Reasons for resistance, and they can be infinite number of reasons, but here's some. Nature of the change itself, the method by which change is introduced, personal factors, reluctance to change, exchange certainty for uncertainty, threats to job security. So when you look at these are things where why people choose. These are some of the things why people would choose to resist. And I can tell you, in most cases, you're going to find some people who might have a little resistance. In some cases, you should find people who have a lot. Either way, you have to deal with it accordingly. And one of the things too is method by which change is introduced. Remember, we talked earlier, a few slides back, leaders need to prepare people beforehand. I call it priming the pump, getting them ready for the change. That's part of what I was referring to. Reasons for resistance: lack of trust in management, low tolerance for change, high degree of parochial self-interest, perceived lack of demonstrated problem, someone else appears to gain the benefits. So again, when you look at these resistance to it, here are more things that comes into play. And look, we can sit here I can be here all day telling you about all the different reasons why people resist, because it's an infinite number of how many. Parallel strategies of reaction to terminally ill and organizational change. So when we look at this, we're looking at reactions from some terminal illness. You see denial, anger, depression, search for alternatives, acceptance of prognosis. So you see it's a process that ultimately before they get to acceptance of prognosis, look what they've gone through 4 other phases. So reactions to major change within the organization: refusal to believe is real, resentment at change initiated, emotional or physical withdrawal, exploration of benefits, embracing the change. Look what happens before they embrace the change. Look at the 4 steps that they go through. So when you see this, this is I call it, this is emotions drive behaviors. And this is where the emotions in here are kicking in, and then that'll drive behaviors for them to resist. Types of resistance to change among employees. So when we look at types of it, so logical, rational objectives. So I want you to just pause right here and just read through those, because again, this is kind of going back into what I was saying earlier. It's just so many things we can list. But pause right here and read through those carefully, because it's self-explanatory when you see it. Suggestions to tackle resistance. So acknowledge employee feelings. If you have people in the group, and a group, they have a group sentiment, or a large number of people have things that they're expressing, you got to acknowledge that. You got to accept it. If they think it's real, and you have to deal with it. Encourage employees to let go of the past and embrace what is new. Again, that process we just talked about. You got to get them there, but in order to get them there, they're going to have to go through a few things mentally, emotionally, but ultimately you want them to embrace what's new and what's coming. And a lot of that can depend on how the manager, his context, he or she, what they use. Insist on an outstanding effort to make the change. Always let people know, I want your best. Insist upon it and get them to know, I need you to bring your A game. Break tasks down into manageable steps. Particularly if you're trying to get people to buy in and accept the change, break it down, make it manageable for them. Don't make it a Herculean task if you're really trying to get them to change, because that bottom line, that's probably going to work against you. I can see someone saying, see, I told you this wouldn't work. Look how hard this is. Possible benefits of resistance. So encourages re-examination of change proposal. Modifications are made to the process to ensure they are appropriate. Identifies problem areas where difficulties may occur. Helps take corrective action before they develop. Encourages better communication, leading to acceptance. So I'm going to say this. There's a positive resistance, and then there's a negative resistance. This is a positive resistance, and this is what comes out of result of the effort that people have. You can figure out some things or see some things that you maybe didn't think about, solve some problems before they actually happen. But it's a win-win attitude when you see this. Transformational leaders. Now, one of the things I can say about transformational leaders is when you're talking about change, particularly significant change, if you would really want to hope that you have transformational leaders who are driving this for you. They initiate bold strategic changes to position an organization for its future. They create vision. They communicate charisma. Important tool that charismatic leaders use involves the art of storytelling. People love stories. So if you have a charismatic leader, one of the things up there is, they have vision, and basically the vision is where do they want to go, and where do they want to take you, and they communicate with charisma. These people are very charismatic when they communicate with people and connect with folks. But here's something that I always tell people. This is something I've never known it not to work. People love stories. If you can master the art of storytelling or incorporate that into what it is you're trying to do, you're going to have a much higher success of winning people over. Stimulate learning, double loop learning, capacity to learn from experience of change. Prepare participants to manage future changes effectively. So this is, looking at current situation and stuff, also preparing them for the future. So capacity to learn from the experience of change. So look at things that we've done in the past. And look at that, and let's look at where we're trying to go, and try to get them to say, okay, let's reference that and see how we can duplicate that effort, for what we did in the past, and prepare for the things that's about to happen. So when we see stages of change, one of the things is unfreezing. Old ideas and practices need to be cast aside as new ones be allowed. So in other words, we got to push that away. You got to let the people know they got to let go. Change, new ideas and new methods and new technologies are learned. So once they let go of the old, they are now receptive to the new. They're open for the new. Refreezing is what has been learned and integrated to actual practice. Now that they've learned it, now you want to incorporate that and get them to actually start practicing and using it. So a model for equilibrium state and change process. So when we look at the change process, you see employee behavior on the vertical line, and on the horizontal line, you see time. where they always say time is money. So if you look at this, I'm going to say this dark line is pointed change occurs. The length of vertical line indicates force. So I'm going to tell you this. Let's look at the dotted line, the solid line that goes across. Let's look at this as productivity. As change is implemented, you see what happened. Initially is low. It goes up a little bit, then it comes down a little bit, but ultimately it goes up. What happens is they've accepted the change. They're more productive now, and they're moving forward on with the product towards the end. Methods to introduce change: adding supportive forces and making recipients aware of them. Remove restraining forces. Increase the actual strength of a supporting force. Communicating that rewards or coercive power will be used to induce change. So again, this is preparing them mentally for the change. You know, how are you setting up for success? Are you removing barriers to success? Are you actually increasing things that would actually promote their success? Are you communicating with them about their awards or how things will be done for people who do well and stuff? Realistically, too, how things may be done for people who don't. This is informing them. Persistently using supporting forces until the change is completed. So what am I doing to support them while this change is going? Anything possible. Decreasing the strength of a restraining force. So if it's something that's a restraining force or whatever else, I want to reduce that. Let's say that, you know, we were working doing one project, and we're working in one building, they move us to another building to start the new project. Well, let's just say the ventilation is not that great over there. So we feel like we're getting too hot. Okay, that's a restraining force. That's going to reduce some things. So I've got to get with the company to work on the HVAC system, find a way to cool off the place where they're working. So building support for change. Use group forces. Provide a rationale for change. Give importance to expectations. Encourage participation. Offer economic and psychological awards. So when you're trying to do this is where, you know, I want to reward you for doing good things. Acknowledge who they are, what they do, and what they've done. And encourage participation. Encourage all the good things that you know that'll help, and discourage the things that are not positive. But most importantly, let them know what's the rationale. Why does this make sense? Why does this make sense for us to do it? That's people understand the why. You got to help them to understand the why. Ensure employee security, communicate and educate, stimulate employees' readiness, work with the total system. So when you look at the support right here, employees, you know, ensure that, you know, that they understand their security. Basically, like when they say security, what is it? That could be physical, that could be job security, any number of things. But here's something that I think is most important too: is you got to talk to them. You got to educate them about what's going on. Be as transparent as possible. Tell them everything that you can tell them. Some things obviously you can't, but tell them what you can. And of course, you want to stimulate their readiness and work with the total system. In other words, whatever it is you do, it has to work with the big scheme, with the big picture as well. And that's where the leader and managers have to make sure that they guide people so that happens. Organizational development. So when you look at organizational development, you have systematic application of behavior science knowledge at various organization levels to bring about planned change. Recognizes organizations as systems with dynamic interpersonal relationships holding individuals together. So here you look at organizational change, your development, you're looking at how people function within this group. And you acknowledge that, you accept that that's the system. What type of relationships are being built with these people in that group? The objective is to make organizations more humanly responsive, effective, capable of continuous organizational learning, self-renewal. So with that in mind, what we're trying to do is we're going to be more empathetic in what we do, and we're trying to relate to them. I always tell leaders, it's two ways you want to connect with people. One, as a professional, the other as a person. That's the humanly response right there. And we want them to be effective. Therefore, you have to figure out things that's working and things are not. And you want them to be able to continue to do this stuff and encourage an environment of learning. Foundations of organizational development. So systems orientation. Interplay of structure, technology, people, behavior, employees in different groups, departments, and locations. Emphasis on the manner in which the parts relate. So again, these systems within the recognized systems and informal systems, you got to recognize that. How do they work together and stuff? And it's like if you're thinking like a car engine. How does it run? Because all the parts work together. That's what you're talking about here for people. Understands causality, causal variables, intervening variables, and end result variables. So understanding these things, how these different variables affect the systems within the organization, and implement corrective actions accordingly. So, common organizational development assumptions. Individuals. People want to grow and mature. Employees have much to offer, energy and creativity. Most employees desire the opportunity to contribute. So, groups. Groups and teams are critical to organizational success. Groups have powerful influence on individual behavior. The complex roles to be played in groups require skill and development. Organization, excessive control, policies, and rules are detrimental. Conflict can be functional if properly channeled. Individual and organizational goals can be compatible. So when you look at these organizations and development assumptions, you have to look at it in three aspects. You have to look at it from the individual perspective, from the group perspective, and from the organizational perspective. And when you're having these things I just talked about, you have to have what we refer to as alignment. If these things are working together and they're in line, then everything works properly. When some of these things get out of balance or they're not working the way they should, you're going to see that it's going to show up in how the group performs. Characteristics of the organization. So you have humanistic values, positive beliefs about the potential and desire for growth among employees. So you believe that people are good and they can do the good things, and you encourage that and you promote that, and that's your outlook. People can feel that. It's not necessarily just you saying it, but they can feel it. Change agent sparks change within the system while remaining partially independent of it. So when you see the change agents and stuff, that's not everybody. And I tell them it's not everybody, but it needs to be the right body, the right person or persons to be the change agent when it's needed. It's not needed constantly. Problem solving, action research, cyclical process of using research to guide action, generates new data as the basis for new actions. We say you never relax on your laurels. You're always looking to continue to do research and look and figure out better way and new ways to do things if you can, because normally that increases your efficiency. Interventions, structured activities designed to help individuals or groups improve their work effectiveness. So classified by their emphasis on the individuals or group. So when you step in to figure out how do I help, what is it we need to improve things? One of the things you can do with groups of teams is ask them what do they need or what do they think they need. Appreciative inquiry turns employees' attention away from negative focus on problems, missteps, efficiency, shortcomings, and blaming. So I always tell people when you have mistakes made, you can view them one of two ways. You can view them as mess ups or screw ups, or you can view them as learning opportunities. And that's how I would view those under the appreciative inquiry. So typical stages in organizational development. So when we look at this, the first thing has to happen is the diagnosis, the problem, the issue, the situation. Now the data collection. Now let's start grabbing data to try to figure out how to deal with this particular situation or problem. Data feedback. Now you're looking at the data and stuff, and you're talking to the folks. You're getting feedback from people about the data that you're looking at, trying to figure out what, basically collectively read this data and figure out what we got. There's your feedback coming. Now we can determine course of action. And so now we start planning the action and getting ready to implement it. And organizational development, you have the intervention where you come in and you start looking at your different systems and how this action is working, who's going to implement it, who's going to do what, are we set up properly, do we have the right people, do they have the right training, are they in the right situations, positions. Then you have your evaluation and follow-up. So your evaluation and your follow-up is when this thing has run its course and you've done everything. This is what I refer to as an after-action briefing, and you look at the good, bad, and the ugly, so you prepare for the next time to even being better. That concludes this chapter.